With the Advantex subfloor assembly, you can be sure that you're building a reputation on something stronger. And the best builders, well, they may always stand apart, but they never stand alone. So ask yourself, are you bringing your A game?
Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. Oh, by the way, Bob, that's the main camera if you want to stare at that one while I do an introduction.
Okay.
We're not going to cut this part out. I'm just going to say, hey, this is Bob Kelly. I'm Jake Bruton, and today on the Unbuild It podcast, I'm joined by my co-host, Peter Yost.
Hi there.
And a new friend, Bob Kelly.
Welcome,
Hello.
Bob.
And this is one of our, get to know you series. And so I think we're just going to do let's just jump right into it and be like, hey, you get to tell us who you are now, Bob. You don't have to, don't feel like you have to string it out, but give us the, how do we get to the construction industry?
How do we get to the construction industry?
Yeah.
Well, I think I started out tinkering. I took everything apart as a kid.
Okay.
I was my mother's nightmare because I was the monkey hanging from the chandelier.
Knew how to take it apart, but not necessarily how to put it back together.
Swinging on it.
Oh.
Okay. Literally swinging on it. That's
Literally, as a 4-year-old. No, but I basically grew up just taking things apart, and I was always very curious. So when I got into college, the only job I could get was I worked for my brother, who was a remodeler out of Chicago.
Okay.
I was his demo guy, and whatever else I needed to be done, sand cabinet doors and that kind of thing. So when I got out of college, I'd kept on buying tools when I was in school because I'd go back and pick up some side jobs and whatnot. So when I got out of school, after studying geriatric psychology, I realized
Geriatric psychology.
That's an
Geriatric
easy
psychology.
jump. I can see how you make a jump from one to the other.
Well, I've always had a fondness of mentorship, trying to find smarter people to learn from. That's how I approach playing guitar or learning pretty much anything. Try to pick on all the old people.
It's
spark. Yeah, very
That's why
cool.
I choose to do the podcast with
Exactly.
Peter. And Steve just happens to be a
I
package
did not
deal.
see that coming, and I should have.
Oh, that's funny.
There's a lot of geriatric psychology that happens on this podcast.
How about crisis intervention?
Yes, that too.
Now I see why you picked me
Mental
to do
health
this with
awareness
Bob.
month on the Unbuild It podcast.
Oh boy.
So when I got out of school, I was on the 4.5-year plan, and on the end of that last half a year, I got married, and I realized I knew more about construction than I did geriatric psychology,
Yeah.
or crisis intervention for that matter. So I got a job, working local, and luckily the guys that worked for me really took me under their wing, and I was able to get stuff done by myself. So I went from this guy Randy to another guy named Victor. Victor really took me under his wing and taught me estimating and how to, we turned our own baseball bats for a softball team.
Oh wow.
He grind the knives in an old Victorian. So the goal was always to get into a job, and you never knew that the work was ever done when the job was done. It was a perfect match, So I come from a background of trying to have flawless, work in a house. That's the goal.
And a lot of in-house stuff, just carpentry, or were you guys doing more than just the carpentry side of things?
I've always stayed small. I've done a few additions. I bought my concrete forms at one point, ended up selling them.
How many jobs did you do before you sold the concrete
You bought
forms?
concrete forms? That's
Yeah.
like how you decided to expand your scope of work? Wow.
Yeah.
And did you do, 3 jobs?
I
And
did
then you
about 3 jobs. And then I traded all those.
Everybody I know that buys their own concrete forms
So
last 3
I
times.
traded those forms for some Wild McLean baseboard radiators for my house when I remodeled it.
Very
So
nice.
it was a good
Because-
investment.
Pretty good
Wait,
trade.
It was.
We're gonna do one more extension on that question. How long did they sit from the 3rd job until you traded them for
Not
baseboard?
a lot.
Okay.
Good.
Only a few months.
Okay. That means you were reasonable with the change rather
They
than
were-
I held on to them for 6 years
Oh,
and then
really?
decided to sell them, sort of thing. I thought about buying concrete forms once. I definitely changed my mind. So, okay. So then you're at that point, you're out on your own, and you guys are tackling a ton of the in-house carpentry,
all in-house.
and trying for, you're working on a lot of what?
Well,
Semi-attached.
it was the few additions that we did, but mostly it was whole house renovations, gut the whole thing, rebuild it, and then rework the openings, of which one footnote would be for me is like I had very little awareness of what flash and details were all about. I just did it the way that everybody else was doing it. No pan flashings. You put in windows just the way you took them out. I mean, how would you know any different?
Yeah. Right.
It
worked to install them that way at some point, right?
Yep.
So why should I change that? So is that the connection with the Unbuild It podcast? How did we meet Bob?
So we met Bob through our very friendly friend Mark Willie, that is always keen to make an introduction when he feels that people need to know each other. But it's not just your construction company; it's an extension of that. So you still own your construction company,
yes,
right?
I have my construction company.
And your guys' focus now is what?
The focus now is mainly low slope roof systems, rebuilding low slope roof systems, and dealing with parapet walls.
Okay.
So
water.
Water.
Let's start with
It's all water.
His job is water.
So you kind of you move from carpentry to low slopes roofs because that you needed to make that connection and nobody else was?
No, it's not that obvious. The connection is that in 2008, my last trim job was basically this beautiful, about $500,000 ebony inlaid teak and oak staircase. And, a friend of mine kept on, he's fed me work for years, and gave me an opportunity to do some really fine work for people who just signed me on and just kept me in their house for years at a time, just let me do stuff. So luckily, in my past, I've always hanging out with like this old gentleman, Cleveland Braithwaite, the old Jamaican joiner. And he taught me how to identify the parts of a window or a door in raw lumber and taught me the joinery techniques. So I really fell in love with joinery techniques, even just putting anything together. So when 2008 came...
Real pocket screw kind of stuff, right?
I'm
kidding.
Yeah, right. Pocket screw. Bubble gum.
Okay. Bubble gum.
So when 2008 came, there's really no good work. It was gone. So a buddy of mine said, hey, there's a lot of these split face block, the textured cinder block structures in Chicago. I mean, during the boom, over 100,000 of these structures were built, all split face cinder block.
Yeah, that's what's on my house in Brattleboro. Architecturally split face concrete block.
Right. And so then I was starting to get referrals to, the water issues that were related to, the water ingress related to these buildings. And so as we took things apart over time, I had another friend who was like my sheet metal mentor. He was trained in Germany, brilliant. And so I learned a lot more than an average sheet metal guy at the time. So I started combining my carpentry with sheet metal, and basically sheet metal has the ability to cap something, shed water, and from underneath it, vent out from underneath it. So there was a building that my buddy, his name was Kurt, he went over to a house and pulled off the capstone off the top of the building and got hit with a blast of hot, wet air coming up from the wall. And
that was obviously trapped.
It was trapped
in the wall at that moment.
And the building was only 12 years old.
Wow. So they were building architecturally split face block with no insulation hollow core 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
For decades.
Yeah.
So the goal was, how do we get the water vapor? How do we dry this thing out? And so we had a suspicion, no facts, because no one else had done it.
That's the way it always starts, is a suspicion.
So if we separate the membrane from the thermal mass, then allow the water vapor to go past, maybe something will happen. Well, we did that with the capstones. We substitute plastics for the mortar so air could flow through. And we separated the roof membrane with basically plywood and a rain screen material, stucco flex, was is the product. Capped it off with sheet metal, and a couple months later, the homeowner said, "Hey, the mold smell left our house."
So you were finding that these low slope roofs where the EPDM or the TPO turned up the inside face, the roof side face of the parapet wall, that they were getting moisture trapped in there as well because the roof was non-vapor permeable and airtight, and it was getting in that solid wall and contributing to the moisture that was also in the wall from whatever other part of the assembly that was letting it in.
Exactly.
Okay.
But there's also some other factors, right? So the other factors are these buildings have no air sealing.
Right.
Millions of buildings have no air sealing, right? So in the masonry structures, even without that, there's also a natural condensation process that's happening even on a dry day. If it's 50 degrees at night and 70 degrees in the morning, all of a sudden the membrane's sweating like crazy. You don't see it, but you'll see the little water beds in the corners. Now, we use mostly modified bitumen roof membrane,
Okay.
the torch down.
Yep.
So as we tried that job, we thought it was just an anomaly. You know, how could this ever dry out? Well, whatever. So somebody else heard about what we did, and then we did it again, and it worked. And then we did it again, and it worked. And then after about 30 buildings, that's when I started to believe that what we were doing was a repeatable event.
Yeah. That there was a systemic problem and you had a solution to that systemic problem.
Right.
So the air is moving up through the cores because they're ungrouted, right?
Well, no, the grout doesn't keep the water out.
No, I know, but if there's a lot of air movement through there, is it because the concrete blocks are ungrouted or not? Because
It doesn't matter.
okay,
It's just because it's a thermal mass in contact with a thinner membrane that changes temperature. Is that it? Mm-hmm. So what we found over time is that when you have a drying effect, when the wind is blowing over the top of your wall, is if you could remove everything that's sealing up everything and let it to the sky, what happens is that dry area here is always attracting moisture up. You don't need air
From
makeup.
below.
right.
And it turns out it's aggressive and it's simple. So then another factor comes into play is maintainability, because like, you know, on the roof of a building you get what we call the doghouse, the one door access. Mm-hmm. Everybody counter flashes the roof membrane with the siding, and there's no maintainability. You got to, you know, they put the mod bit, the roof membrane over the wall, and then they set the stones on top with the clay tiles. And so you got to take everything apart just to get to the parts of the building to maintain it. So the sheet metal side of me said, well, you know, how can we have things that are removable so we can have things that are permanent and serviceable at the same time? So now what Wickright is these venting strips that allow air to pass through. You can take them apart. The wall still stays dry. You can access the roof membrane.
Cool. Because what you're accomplishing there is the two things: to get the ventilation where it's been sorely needed, but also because I think what you're talking about is these old buildings that are really, really durable, but there are always parts of the building that need to be replaced or changed.
I wish it was old buildings. Almost all of our clients are buildings less than 20 years old.
Yeah.
No matter it's split face block or limestone, or there's another product called Renaissance stone where it's incredibly porous. Mm-hmm. So we figured out ventilation control and vapor control in the masonry structure specifically. I mean, it's a completely different animal than a wood structure.
Yeah.
And then also studying the effects of fiberglass insulation in that environment versus foam in that environment, and we find that foam is the devil, because there's this unusual hydrostatic pressure that builds on the inside of a masonry structure at the foam. It doesn't keep the water out. What it does, it actually creates hydrostatic pressure. And when the sun hits the building, it radiates through the foam, through all the openings, and then quickly rots the trusses. So the rotten trusses has brought us to another part of our business, which is we're tent builders. So
you were telling me about this. So he's replacing roofs a lot of times, and he's replacing structural elements, but the buildings are occupied. This was like the conversation that you and I had, that I was just like, oh, Bob is smarter than Mark Willie.
No, not yet. I'm working on it though.
I'm kidding. So, sorry, I interrupted because I got excited. That was all. Go ahead.
Oh, that's cool. So I got desperate. Luckily I know a guy who owns a marina, and I've been telling him this idea about, like, I'm running into this problem all the time. I don't know what to do. Maybe we need to get a pontoon cover and have a frame and hoist it up with a crane and cover these places because
you have to take the roof off to then be able to get to structural framing for the roof to replace structural framing that's rotten in these buildings.
Because I'm trying to do repairs on the ends of the trusses. I'm trying not to remove the mechanicals because the removal of those trusses on it. See, your common footprint of a building in Chicago is 20 by 70. So, so what we're doing is if we can tent off the whole building, we remove all the plywood sheathing and the roof membrane, and then we can see.
But you're talking about creating a temporary roof that's basically a tent,
Right?
But it's gonna see wind.
We've been in wind gusts, so we use 10 mil boat shrink wrap, and we had a custom welded aluminum rafter system set up.
Wow.
Where every 8 feet we have adjustable aluminum rafters that anchor on, and then when you wrap the whole thing in boat shrink wrap, we bring it around and tuck it to the inside and anchor it with some brackets and 2x4s, and we put an exhaust fan in one end. So we're creating negative pressure, and we've been in 65-mile-an-hour wind gusts.
Wow.
And snowstorms.
So if the listeners aren't following, the other options are take the roof off of a building and it not be protected while you have the roof off.
Right.
Or go inside and damage everything inside and make everything inside dusty and disrupt homeowner lives.
Right.
People have to move out of buildings and whatnot. And so this method, I would assume, has made you guys way more competitive too, because even if you're the same price or slightly more, they probably would go, well, but we don't have to move out.
Because the extra for removing trusses is about $250,000. So we build a tent and do the repairs for about a third of that.
So what you're saying is that the roof truss systems, because they're in direct contact with the masonry
And unprotected.
but you're going to repair those?
Mm-hmm.
How do you repair trusses that are compromised where they're let into the masonry?
That's the fun part.
If you tell me this, do you have
That's
to shoot
the fun
me?
part.
Not yet. No, I'll just nudge
He
you.
didn't say no. He said not yet. Oh,
We haven't gotten deep enough yet.
So we started, so what we do is we learn that if we block out the ends of the trusses, oftentimes, see, the rot for trusses is usually just at the wall.
right. right.
Your 14-inch insulated, even with blown-in cellulose, it's a really good thermal barrier, right? So you're not getting any condensation in that area because it's always at the source of moisture, which is on the end. So we learned that if we pack the ends of the trusses and then glue and nail structural 3/4 structural grade plywood to the sides, then what we do is we make these brackets, these steel brackets that are roughly 12 by 4 with holes that line up with where we can anchor them into the cinder block, because cinder block is every 8 inches. So we go into the cores with like a Hilti net system. And then on the sides, we have an array of holes that are like almost 6 by 10. So there's 60 holes in that bracket.
So rather than a compression loading, you're putting in like a brace system to move that load to where the trusses are solid.
Exactly. So we go from top bearing to bottom bearing.
Oh, to bottom bearing. Yeah.
By bracketing them on the sides. And then when we do that, then we can cut the truss away from the wall and keep the water from any condensation from forming at that point.
And that bracketed system gives you the lateral stability that you need because interesting. Because you're taking care of both the compressive load, but also the need for lateral stability.
And so even though you're fastening to the side, it's not a saddle, you're fastening to the sides.
To the sides.
That causes it to be bottom bearing then?
Well, because in a sense, it becomes bottom bearing because you're changing the dynamics from the top to the bottom.
All the weight is sitting on it then. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I was having a hard time with that for a second.
So we've gotten into this. So we understand how to cover the building. We understand how I'm trying to create value. To make money, you have to create value, and then you take part of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the goal. And so then we're saving these buildings. We're getting them to breathe. The air is better. There's no more mold.
So are these buildings single owners? Do you do any condo association?
Lots of condos.
Oh boy, that's a whole nother challenge because you don't have to convince one person. You've got to convince a whole bunch of people that, and certainly the people with top floor units are going to have a different perspective than the people that live on the bottom.
Oh yeah, they're screaming.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, and the person in
So
between.
how do you, is that part of your business plan is like, I know how to convince condo building owners to do this kind of work?
Well, okay, so there's a little technique that I've
You're going to have
learned.
to shoot me again, right?
Yeah, I'll just nudge you a little bit. What I've learned is that when somebody calls, the biggest problem with repair jobs is that the homeowner often dictates what the contractor is bidding on.
Oh, that's a recipe for
So
disaster.
give
right
me a
there.
price on, a new window. Give me a price on that. Give me a price on that. Okay, sorry for the odd voice, but it's like you get a little
Sure.
irritated by that, right? So I say, no, we're in a job where we are the experts. We have 10 years of experience in every facet of this aspect of construction. And I will not give you a price, but I will give you an assessment for X amount of money. And then that assessment is actually a prescription for how to fix it from the simplest parts to the more complicated, systematic approach. And then, so I try to give them some structure and a budget. And then, I offer them, it's like, if you want me to do the work, I'll do it. If you want me to be your advocate and your designer, or I can just train your contractor and I'll give you the materials. So we've been making our own flashing materials in our shop. We usually keep a couple thousand feet of each profile on hand because now we're getting more and more business. I mean, it's really starting to take off. And
Also, for those of you that didn't catch that, Bob gets paid for proposals. In other words, basically.
yeah, I get paid
For his
proposals.
expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I refund the money back after we start the job.
If you do the job.
Yeah. So it's not a loss leader until you're sure you get the work.
Correct.
That's the way to do loss
Yeah.
leader.
So, if you want to kick tires, that's fine. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we're fortunate that we're the only guys doing this.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that if we just go quickly through the trajectory, like carpenter working inside the building, you kind of moved your business to where the problems were, right? But you're working with customers, you're coming up with new techniques, and you're coming up with new materials. That's. I mean, I'm gonna blow up your skirt a little bit,
That's
but
cool.
that's Renaissance approach to building, right? Yeah.
All
That's
right.
it. For those of you
So you don't have to
listening,
shoot
Bob
me
gave
anymore,
two,
right?
No, you can-
two thumbs
you can
up.
hit
And now
me
we can, yeah, we'll hug later.
Again. Okay, so now you have a construction company, but you also have a materials company.
Right.
Right? And that materials company, you alluded to it, is Wickright.
Is Wickright.
Barring any new things that are coming down the pipeline that may or may not be out yet, that we'll let you decide if you want to talk about.
Okay.
What is your like base product line for the stuff that you guys are using with your construction company?
Okay, so my construction company, as a company, I'm a roofing contractor officially. I'm no longer a carpenter, but I love the heavy structures, and I love the design, and you got to embrace your clients, because your clients, almost all my clients, have some level of PTSD. Okay, and that's actually an important part of our conversations because
This gets back to the geriatric
it
psychology.
does
Yeah.
actually in crisis intervention. Because when you start to identify where your clients are along the 5 stages of depression.
I think we got our show
Did
title.
not see that
5
coming.
Stages of Depression with Bob. Go ahead.
So I'll joke with my clients, when they do say, when
But
they
it's
sign,
true. It's true. Yeah.
when they sign, I say, well, I'm glad you're at stage 5. And they say, what do you mean? It's like, well, you signed the contract. It's time to
Yeah.
it's time to get on
That
it.
means you were.
Recognition is the first step, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why I try to drive that development of my client, accepting it through an assessment with pictures and explanations. I spend a lot of time educating, why this happened. Now, if we have another 5 hours, we can talk about that. But in a nutshell, what happened was that this thing called Portland cement was invented in the 1800s and became roughly, available through Edison, who learned how to grind Portland cement and became commercially available. And as time went on, our materials have only gotten harder and harder.
Yeah.
And when things are harder, water passes through easier. So the dynamics are different. and type N mortars always retain moisture. I've drilled plenty of holes in walls where water came squirting out. Mm-hmm. So when I teach them that what this problem is not poor workmanship, but it's like a three-way train wreck between building science, supply chain, and talent, because the talent comes from Europe. The materials come from America. Now, we have two different, European craftsmanship is circa 1860. Clay brick, pure lime mortars, sand.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so all the spalling of brick happens when you reverse the breathing mechanism in these old buildings, or in new buildings it traps all the moisture. So when they understand that, then they step back and they see the big picture. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
So how do people get a hold of Wickright specialty building products?
They look up water intrusion on the internet, split face block. You know, the SEO is pretty good. You know, so if you type in something related to wet masonry, you'll get us.
But what is your website?
Wickright.com.
Okay.
So it's not clever. It's not RITE. It's RIGHT.
GHT.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Renaissance man in you.
So do you want to talk about any of the upcoming products that you have coming down the pipeline?
You know, we've got
We get secret teases sometimes,
Okay.
and don't feel obligated. We're not putting you on the spot. We're not going to cancel the show if you're going to not share.
Okay, well, I'll share. There's one really cool thing that we've been playing with, and we're calling this our scupper step. Okay.
Scupper step.
Step. Yeah, my partner loves to name the things I invent.
Okay.
And so what it is, it's basically on a parapet wall. Mm-hmm. It's a metal bracket. It's an aluminum bracket that has two hooks on the outside that an extension ladder hangs into. And then we put a scaffold plank with ladder jacks down at the level of the opening of the drain, the scupper, on a flat roof, because you can never get to that. So when you roof through an opening like that, before you set the metal, you always run your roof through and you anchor it just like a roof termination. Mm-hmm. Right? And then you put in your sheet metal, your drain, and then you strip that in, and then we trim it out on the outside. But you can't do that work unless you're right there, which is 6 feet down from the top of the wall and 40 feet up from the ground.
Wow, yeah.
So we climb down on that ladder with harnesses, and it's tied off. And so we use this product for ourselves, and last winter the previous winter, there was so much ice damming in Chicago that several of my clients complained about water coming in their roof. It was because the water level was higher than the skylights because of all the ice damming.
Yeah. Wow.
The scupper clogs, ice piles up on the roof. It gets
We've never had an ice dam issue. And so
yeah, but how do you plan for it's coming in the skylight that's 18 inches above?
You can't plan for that.
You know, you have to. Well, I mean, I can. I don't put in skylights, but.
And we got one more. Actually, one more that we've been playing with this winter is that in order to run the ice melting cable, we use a 220 powered line. So almost all my customers have their air conditioning units on the roof. So what we're doing is we're taking a 4-gang exterior box, and we run the air conditioning power through the box, and then split off the power for summer use,
it's seasonal use anyway,
and winter use. And so we've been powering without having to do any extra electrical work, we've been powering these wires, and we've done 3 or 4 of them this winter. And
Did not see that coming.
Yeah.
When you told me as a flashing guy that he would, dub in 220 as part. That's cool.
Getting a picture that he spends a lot of time on the roof of very similar buildings that have the same problems.
But I can't do it without my guys. My guys are dedicated,
They
very
won't hear this.
talented.
You don't have to give them credit.
Okay, I won't give them any credit then. Forget it.
It's a valid point. Everybody's got a team. None of us are in this alone except for Peter.
Well, we'll talk about that later.
Okay. Bob, thanks for joining us on the
Thank you very
podcast
much.
today.
That was great, Bob.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram. It's Unbuild It Podcast. Actually, did we change it to Unbuild It Show? I believe we did. Unbuild It Show or Unbuild It Podcast on Instagram. You'll have to figure that out. Think of it as homework. And if you are just listening to the podcast, the audio version, you missed quite a bit today. I suggest you try the YouTube version too. Just do them both. Till next time, have a good day.
See ya.
Thank you.